Hi guys, it's May, and I definitely went overboard and a little bit crazy with our museums and libraries assignments. Didn't mean to. I'm sure this happened to everybody. Started looking at all the pictures and the articles, and one thing led to another. So, I really wanted to use VoiceThread just because I found so many cool images on the websites and of the libraries themselves that I felt like it would add another dimension. And so I'm going to take you through 4 libraries and then 2 kind of, I don't know, cultural heritage institutes, and I'll let you decide where you think they fall, and then 2 museums. Okay, so I decided to start with the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh. I know Carnegie is obviously a big name in libraries, but I chose this simply because I have family in Pittsburgh. I'm a Pittsburgh girl. I've been to these libraries. They're amazing, and I wanted to kind of get a big city perspective. So their website's very lively. One thing I noticed, probably everybody noticed, the search bar, very prominent on every site. On this menu right up here, it has different things on pretty much every site, but it's omnipresent. This is a feature I really liked, and I actually found on a lot of the different library websites, which was e-reading or e-access, for lack of a better phrase. Magazines, newspapers, books, music. Almost every site has a different way for people to access it through their libraries. What I particularly liked about the Carnegie Library is you'll see here they have the getting started, right? Get device instructions, get device instructions. So they're not just making this accessible in terms of this is where you go to get it, but also this is how you use it, because just presenting someone with these links is not going to make a difference if they don't know how to use them. I also found on the website some really interesting blogs. One was the 11th Stack blog, and it had a lot of things for the blind and physically handicapped. And then one thing I really enjoyed seeing too was they had the new and notable, and then the staff picks, which kind of reminded me, I'm sure we all remember video stores when you used to go rent VHS and DVD, and they'd always have the staff favorites. So it was kind of neat to see that realized on the website. So my next library is the Library of Trinity College in Dublin. It has great historical significance, but it's also an academic library, and you can see that. Again, you've got your search bar right here, but then when we look at the menus here and here, they're not so focused on community needs. They're focused on, okay, what does someone who is coming to this college and needing to access the library, what are they going to use? And particularly here, we have the new student orientation slides, which I found really helpful, how that was just right there, easy to access for anyone who needs it. So this is the lower part of that same Trinity College website, and you'll notice the news. I found this very interesting, how it's kind of hidden, sort of. I know it's at the top of the page here, but it's actually in the center of the page. It's very easy to scroll past. I actually did a couple times. But then they have a focus on their special collections, and their blogs were so interesting to me. Early Irish manuscripts, tales of mystery and pagination, changed utterly, Ireland and the Easter Rising blog. So I thought that was really interesting, how it reflected the culture of the library. This was another really interesting feature, and actually is going to kind of tie into the next library I look at, is that the library has exhibitions electronically available in slideshows, and this is one of them. It was Oscar Wilde, From Decadence to Despair, and there were a couple others that they offered. So here we see it's a library, and yet it has an exhibition element electronically. And there were so many times when I was doing this assignment that I went back to this reading, and can't remember what it was ages ago, that talked about how libraries and museums and archives were never fully separated, and then they tried to separate them, but now they're kind of coming back together again. And that was really reflected in several of the locations I looked at. Here, of course, we have a library, yet we have these exhibitions. And the next one I'll be showing you also has this. So this is the research tools section, which was honestly one of my favorite parts of this page. I clicked on ordering reproductions because I just thought that was really neat. But when I looked over here, it seems so interesting because there are so many things you wouldn't expect, like finding aids. That's archival. I would not necessarily expect to see that in a library. Now, granted, it is rare book and manuscript, so it's done probably a little bit differently, but it did surprise me a little bit. You also have over here, here's the digital library, the closed collection schedule so that you can access some things that are not always available. And, of course, newly cataloged acquisitions, which I thought was really impressive because everything I've been reading about archives is that the backlog is enormous. And so the fact that digitizing allows them to immediately put out there to the public, these are the things that we have, that we've cataloged. It's consistently being updated, or as much as it can be updated, so that the public has the access that they need. So this actually, this goes back to my final slide for the Trinity College, which was about the online exhibitions that they offer. Well, in the same way, the Beinecke Library also has exhibitions, but they're not online. They have this one, as you can see, it's from Friday, September 1st to Sunday, December 10th. And again, this is sort of the blurring of the lines of those cultural heritage institutes, where this is a library, yet we see archival elements in the research tools, and we see exhibitions not unlike a museum. So it is fascinating to me here that the lines are being blurred, and yet it makes sense because we're looking at things that are historical, and historical things are in museums, they're in archives, and so there is a certain logic to the combination of these elements. I find this library amazing, and I'm, setting aside for the moment that it's a library and an opera house, which is very cool and somewhat incongruous. But this actually straddles the border between U.S. and Canada, and you can see that here. And it focuses on the cultural needs of the community on both sides. And what I find amazing is you can walk in on the Vermont side and then wander over to Canada, to pick up whatever book you're looking for. And I thought that was a really interesting mission. Very different from some of the other missions. The Carnegie was about community. It was very typical. It was a nice website, but it was very typical of the kind of website you would expect. The Dublin Library, the Trinity College Library and the Beinecke Library, the same. This one, the situation is so unique, so the mission is so unique. So when you actually look for the library, it takes you here. So you have to separately click on the library link at the top. And the library, it takes you here. Again, it's reminiscent to me somewhat of the Carnegie Library, maybe not as flashy, but you see the catalog information. And here, just like how the Carnegie had the information on e-access for magazines and books, we have downloadable audio and ebooks. You have got your hours, some events, not quite as fancy, but still gets the job done. One of the really amazing features of this library, and actually if you scroll down a little bit from where I was on the previous page, there's something called Universal Class, and you can do over 500 online courses just using your library card, which I find just incredible and amazing. that this kind of knowledge is available to people. There was also something called Mango Languages, which I think is meant to be like an online language tutorial. But when I clicked on it, it just immediately asked for a library card number, so I couldn't pursue it further. But I thought that this emphasis on education was very important. It's definitely something people need access to. So this is another library on college campus. This is the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library that's on the Yale University campus. It is somewhat different than the Trinity Library in that while Trinity did have a lot of historical significance, they did have a rare book collection, that was really just one segment of that entire library, whereas here it would seem that these rare books and manuscripts had their own library within the Yale system. And I found this very fascinating, very interactive. Again, we have our just ubiquitous search bar, right, and our different menus. This is really neat. I found it totally by accident. If you click on that, it enlarges and it has what they call the highlights of their collections, and there's really some amazing stuff. Remember how I said that the Haskell Library straddles the border between the US and Canada? Well, it's French-Canadian territory. This is in Quebec. So what you have here then is a separate site that offers access to French-speaking patrons, which I think is amazing. It's interesting to me because it's actually a little bit different. It's a little more interactive. This area right here is like a slideshow that's swiping. So it's actually a little bit fancier than the English counterpart. And I'm including this just for the sake of comparison. This is the actual library page for the same library, but it's of course it's in French, and it is very different. We see not the same image of the child. There don't appear to be any other links that you can click on. So the approaches are different, but the information presumably would be the same. My French is rusty. This is the cemetery library, and this is definitely one of those gray areas. And this is kind of what I was mentioning at the beginning. I'm really fascinated to hear people's thoughts about where this falls kind of in our continuum of archives, museums, libraries, historical sites, etc., in terms of cultural heritage institutes. So essentially what it is it's a cemetery in Austria, a Jewish cemetery that was destroyed during World War II, and in attempting to restore it, obviously some of the tombstones were irreparably damaged. And so instead, these bookshelves were created, and they hold books on Jewish philosophy, theology, literature, and but you'll notice that they are closed. Now, I did some reading, and it says that you can actually check the books out. I'm not sure how, though. And so that kind of got me to thinking, well, is this more of an exhibit? Is this a different way of presenting culture and a moment in time, an event that is very important and deserves preservation? Is it a combination? And so ultimately, that's kind of why it's here between my library and museum section. This they call it a museum, they call it a library. It's the picture book museum library in Japan. Looks amazing. It looks like maybe the most fun place you could have ever gone to as a child. But it's very unclear how people classify it. When I first found it, they said it's the picture book library. So I'm looking all over for it, and then I find no, it's the picture book museum. And go round and round, and I guess the way it actually started was it was created to serve some preschools, but then kind of became a museum because of the product that resulted. It's still, though, a fully functioning picture book library with a very specific audience. And it's just incredible when you look at it, but it's a tangle. What do we have here? Do we have museum with permanent exhibition, or do we have library with access for a very specific population? And this is an entirely self-indulgent picture that I included for no reason other than look how cool that is. I would just love to go and explore this library. I love how open and inviting it is. It looks like a great place for kids to go and engage with reading. So if you get a chance, you should for sure Google images, take a look at these. It's just incredible what they have here. This is the main page for the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C., which looks like about the coolest museum that ever existed. The website is amazing because when you come to it, the background is different. You know, this changes, it sort of swoops in on you. When I first clicked on it, you know, I look down and then I look up and then there's James Bond staring at me. And it was 50 years of Bond villains, which I thought was just really, really neat. But it's very flashy. It's really meant to engage you. And one of the things, you know, that I noticed here and in a lot of the other museum websites is this is the location. This is a gathering place for here your next holiday party. But that is one of the main differences that I noticed. You can reserve rooms within those different libraries, but that is with a very specific purpose of study and academia, whereas here it's a lot more involved, I would say. And so they have all different kinds. They really have this prominent information on their social media and the spy store because everybody's got to have that. And actually, this really made me laugh. This little guy right here, the gnome in the trench coat, yes, apparently that's a thing, he will get you 20% off in the spy store. So they have this really engaging web page, and then if you come down to the exhibitions and experiences, it gets even better. This is the interactive spy experience, and that was one of the things I definitely noticed about the International Spy Museum. It's not just exhibitions; there's also experiences, and so that was one of the things that kind of set it aside for me from other museums. Is that pretty much everything else? It's exhibition. They're little, you know, bells and whistles, but they're pretty much the same thing. So you watch a video or you press a button. Here, this is really meant to get people involved and not just sort of staring at the wall. And so here you have your Operation Spy, an immersive and interactive experience at the International Spy Museum. This is the School for Spies, but it's actually contained in the exhibition, which I remember going to a lot of exhibitions, come from a family really into museums, but never having anything like this before. And it looks really fun and exciting. Obviously, I think that the content makes it easier to create something fun and exciting, but this really made me think about when we ask questions of relevance. You know, how do we make our cultural heritage institutes relevant? How do we get people to keep showing up when everything's online? What can we offer them? This is one way to do it. And it looks like it would be a lot of fun, not just for kids, but really for anyone who had an interest in it. This is my final museum. This is for the Hall of Flame Fire Museum in Phoenix, Arizona. Very important information, but one thing I noticed immediately, and probably you too have noticed it as well, is that the site is very basic. It makes you wonder, perhaps, is it budget or is it topic? You know, some of these things that they're remembering or commemorating are very solemn and very somber. So is it related to that? We have this information here that I found that was unique from other museums. They have the Firefighting Hall of Heroes, which honors firefighters who have died in the line of duty. Not something that you always see in museums. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But a lot of times Hall of Fames are kind of separated, and museums, they're different things. I chose to include this particular part of the site, partly because I had mentioned it, the Firefighting Hall of Heroes, but also because I wanted to just continue to emphasize the difference in this website from not just the Spy Museum, but from the library websites. From a lot of websites, it seems a lot more basic, right? We have the single picture here, bullet points, this different information, and so it's not necessarily as engaging as other sites, and you have to wonder how that might affect the museum itself.